that we care any less at the OUC. Our professionals are dedicated, they're public safety heroes, getting the call done. And so I also want to say that 1.5 million times a year we interact with residents and visitors of Washington, D.C. We take that job very, very seriously, and we're always looking to improve upon how we have those interactions and the responses that we send. So on Monday, August 14th at 17:06, we received a transfer from Montgomery County. The caller claims that she's the manager of district dogs at 680 Rhode Island Avenue and that there were flooding conditions. That call was disconnected, and later on in this timeline, we did call her back. At 17:09, we received a call from the Prince George's County 911 Center as a transfer. That caller advised she was the assistant manager of district dogs and was watching the camera, that there was flooding with people and dogs, and 2 minutes into that call, we advised that we would be sending help. At 17:12, we were able to make contact back with the original caller from Montgomery County to ask if they could still see the cameras. That caller then advised that they could confirm that all walls facing the street had collapsed and that there were dogs in the back of the store, but that the camera feed had cut out and that they were no longer watching. At 17:18, we received a call from inside of District Dogs, located at 680 Rhode Island Avenue. That caller stated that they were trapped in water and that there were about 6 people and that they couldn't find a way out. That call was broadcasted at 17:20. We advised that Engine 12 and the rest of the units on the water rescue box and the command staff that there were people inside of the water. At 17:20, simultaneously, fire and EMS crews were watching someone swim in the area out of the district dogs. At 17:29, fire and EMS crews advised that they had entered the building and had begun rescuing individuals and dogs. And at 17:35, they called the caller who was still on with the call taker, the caller from inside of District Dogs, and the call taker disconnect because it's at that time that they had first seen the personnel from fire and EMS. I also want to state that I think that all of the District Dogs employees acted heroically that day, from calling from inside while they were standing on desks, and the callers who made an effort to call 911 in a jurisdiction other than ours and get transferred here so that they could relay that information to us.
Hi, I'm Sierra Fox with Fox 5. Do you believe there's anything your departments could have done differently that day? And if so, can you specify exactly what?
Sure. Our call takers and our dispatchers are trained for incidents. Every once in a while, an incident, an unprecedented incident kind of like this one comes about that we haven't fully prepared ourselves for, our staff for. As much as we try, as hard as we work to do those things. And so, the information was put into the card, and we're looking at how we can better help them understand, especially from third-party callers, the severity or the urgency of an incident, so we can get that information over to dispatch and relayed to the responders on scene. The other thing is that, all of the information that is put into a CAD card by our 911 call takers is relayed to every person who has a CAD system. And I think sometimes that information is passed on, and sometimes, especially when units are en route to calls, that information is read by them while they're en route. This was a situation where the units were already on scene, they were in several feet of water, even at a command post, and so strengthening our commitment to relaying that information verbally over the radio is something that we will be doing in the future, and a commitment that the chief and I have made.
Director, can you and the chief, have you been advised by city legal counsel not to say OUC made a mistake in dispatching this call by not conveying the urgency of it? Have you been advised legally not to say you made a mistake?
I haven't been advised of anything. What I have said.
Chief?
Not at all.
Okay, but simply can we say for human consumption, not opportunities to fix, did a dispatcher not convey the urgency of what the caller said? It wasn't just a third party, it was the manager identifying herself.
Sure.
She said the walls were coming in, or comes whatever the exact word. Did the dispatcher make the mistake in not giving this call a higher attention?
I want to be clear that, just for understanding, if I can here, that the call taker, our public safety call takers, are the people interacting with the public. That call information is then put into the CAD system. It is then read by a dispatcher who is relaying that information to fire and EMS or MPD personnel. So urgency and disconnect, I mean, words are in the screen, but the dispatcher never talked to the caller.
And I apologize, it's very short. When the call taker took the information and put it in the CAD with cards, did the call taker, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, write down who all are coming in?
I would have to go back and look, but I am fairly certain that all of the information that was relayed was put into the CAD card.
Okay, so in our briefing, you said
Sure.
that there were 3 breakdowns, at least that I counted, with the dispatcher, correct? That the dispatcher misspoke, is that correct? Can you characterize that misspeak?
The water leak, yes.
Okay. That they also did not convey the urgency, that they did not fully grasp what was in the CAD report in front of their eyes, and so they didn't get the full picture, and therefore did not send it out as urgently as it should have been. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, so that's great. And you blame this partially on understaffing, is that correct?
so I would like to have more staffing so that each tactical channel could have its own dispatcher, yes.
Okay. And so, is there not a dispatch supervisor? Is there not somebody who is in between the call taker and the dispatcher who's also supposed to be putting eyes on this? What happened to that person or those people?
There is a dispatch supervisor, and there's also a fire liaison that Chief Donnelly talked about. So there are people looking at these calls.
So that sounds like 3 people who missed it.
I think I have supervisors, yes, but I also have multiple calls going on at the same time.
Well, that's every day, Director.
Sure,
There's
absolutely.
That's what you signed up for. That's what you're supposed to be trained to do,
Absolutely.
right? And so that's not the fault,
No,
right? So Chief Donnelly, you said downstairs you wish you'd gotten word earlier. You wish you'd gotten there sooner.
So I would have liked to have been able to get there earlier. I think one of the things that's important to realize here is when that front wall collapsed, it was a sudden and catastrophic incident. It was immediate. That wall came in, and the water came rushing in like a waterfall and immediately filled up the room. And at that point, everybody's life was in danger.
And that was at what time?
Looking at the 911 call transcripts, it looks like it happened before the call at 5:06.
Right, so people's lives are in danger at 5:06. Nobody gets on the radio to tell your crews until 5:22. Your crews don't get there till 5:29. We know that there are 10 dogs that are dead. I've got to ask the uncomfortable question. Would some of those dogs be alive today had OUC properly dispatched and categorized the call and gotten word to your crews who were outside sooner?
I think that's a really hard question. The incident was immediate, right? That's all I can say. I don't want to speculate on that.
Can you talk about how you would change your posture maybe at that point when you got that first call? Would you have sent a boat over to the building?
Yeah, we would have sent a boat over. If at that point the front wall had broken, we would have been able to get in. If the front wall hadn't broken at that point, it would have been a very different situation. We'd have had to go up to the first floor, and try and find a way down and guide people out through a stairway or something if that existed. There's a lot of unknowns in that, so it's really hard to say. Until the wall broke, you could not open any of the doors from until the window wall broke. There's no way to open the doors from the outside. There's no way to exit if you're inside. And that becomes a big part of the challenge and complexity of this rescue.
Director, what's going to happen to this dispatcher that misspoke and that did not elevate the gravity of this call, and the people that are supervising him or her?
I hold everybody accountable, but I can't talk about individual personnel action.
We talk about transparency, and I think it's difficult for people to process, you know what I mean?
Sure.
To hear that and say someone did not elevate it, they could have given rescuers more time, but then there's just nothing spoken of there's a consequence to my actions as
So,
job?
there's consequences to every action at OUC under my administration. Please don't mistake that for 1 second. What I can tell you is, in these types of cases, I have a Office of Professional Standards and Development, I have investigators, and I have operational managers and supervisors. I always look at what the history is for any employee. I'm not talking about these employees specifically, I'm talking in general about every single incident at OUC. We look at the incident, we investigate the incident, we fact find, and then based on what stage this person is in following the DPM of progressive discipline depends on what happens. If it's a first error, then we are going back to training, we're trying to identify problem, we're trying to correct performance. If that person is not responsive to performance, then I have decisions to make, and I make them. And they're not the easiest decisions to make, but I do it for the greater good of our agency and every single person who relies on our system every single day. I can help when it comes to performance. You know, before I got here, we had very minimal training standards in place. We've talked about that ad nauseum, maybe, that we've really are changing that. So we're pouring into the people, we are disciplining when necessary and appropriate, and we are making tough decisions when those decisions have to be made.
What about in this case? We're not asking for a name. You don't have to give us a name, but you can just tell us this anonymous dispatcher, is that dispatcher still dispatching calls today, still on the schedule? Have you taken any disciplinary action? Have they been moved off for training and the supervisors involved?
That is part of their personnel jacket, and I can tell you that we're taking the appropriate action, and we are sharing that information with DCHR and my boss.
Why don't you tell us if that dispatcher is still working? We're not asking for a name. We don't know who this is. You have a multitude of people working there. You won't even tell us if this person has been disciplined or still dispatching calls?
No, I'm not. This person is a dispatcher at the Office of Unified Communications. We are taking appropriate action.
And what is that action?
I've tried to be very clear.
This is what you have in your tool belt. Is this person still dispatching calls?
Yes.
So they haven't been disciplined?
A discipline doesn't
Okay,
mean
have
that you
they been
can't
disciplined?
dispatch calls.
Yes, have they been disciplined?
I am not going to talk about a personnel jacket. I cannot talk about disciplinary
Yes, you
for
can.
individual.
You said you because we don't know this person's name. Let me ask you this, Director. You've heard
Like-
from the chief. He wishes you had told him sooner, right? We don't know if your dispatcher's delay caused the death of those 10 dogs, but the owners of those dogs and every other dog lover in the city
Sure.
is going to see this tonight, and they're going to learn that your dispatcher delayed in response of getting into that flood. What do you say to those 10 dog owners who are now going to think that had your dispatcher done a better job, their dog might be alive?
I don't know that the chief said that would be the case, but I am very sorry, and I said that at the onset, I'm very sorry for any loss of life, whether it's human or canine. What I'm saying to you is, I take the job that we do at OUC very, very seriously. Please do not be mistaken about that. I make tough decisions every day. There is conduct and there is performance. Performance, I can help fix with training. Conduct, I cannot. This person does not have a conduct issue. This was a performance issue. We are addressing that. Now, whether that is with additional training or whether that is with some other sort of discipline, but it is always captured in some way or form. I don't just train people and not capture that and say, and they get a pass. There are no free passes at OUC for our employees.
I have a question. Both you and the chief were describing this as sort of an unprecedented situation, and where things were happening at the same time. And I get the impression you're going to make changes. What are you going to do differently now?
So we are going to make changes. So the chief and I, as we talked about, we talk every single day, right? We're in lockstep. And so one of the things that we're going to look at is call questioning. Our call protocol system that we're using right now is antiquated, and I've also talked about how we're replacing that with a more robust system that will help get the right type of call to dispatch, sooner. The other thing that we're talking about is staffing. That's a big thing, right? So when I took this position, we had 35 open positions in call taking. 36. 11 people since I have started are now on the floor as bona fide call takers. 10 are in class, and 15 start their first day on September 11th. That would, in theory, leave a zero, that we would take that number down to zero. We would have zero shortages in call taking. With that, we also know that not everybody is cut out for this position and that we tend to lose some in the training process. So this Thursday and every third or fourth Thursday for the rest of time, we have the prospect day where we are continuously hiring call takers and dispatchers. For the dispatch position, I have 9 open vacancies right now in dispatch. That's a combination between police and fire. Am working with DCHR. I've put in a proposal to take 5 of those positions and make them 10 part-time positions just to help stop the bleed.
But I understand are you doing things like having, I got the impression from the earlier situation that you're talking about more radio transmissions because you write this CAD stuff down and some people aren't reading it.
Right, so we are, and more radio transmissions means more people for each of the TAC channels, and that's the end goal. Getting more people into the seats at OUC, making sure that our policies are steadfast, and making sure that when there are events that we've never dealt with before historically, that we're looking at them holistically and making any policy and operational changes that need to be made. And I'm lucky to have Chief Donnelly and Chief Smith sitting right there with me, helping make those decisions.
Chief Donnelly, would it have been better if more people had been actually on the radio rather than typing messages?
So I can't answer that. The more radio communications is what we're looking for. Director McGaffin and I have talked about that quite a bit, and that is something we're working toward, absolutely.
So in the old days, a lot of this would have just gone up in radio traffic, and people would have known quicker than writing this stuff down through.
So it depends on when in the old days. We've had a lot of different things over the years. So I think it is one of the challenges of technology, right? Getting it into the right place and making sure the information isn't lost in the technology. And I think there's some things as we go through the after action and can do the forensic audit of what happened here, that maybe there's some technology changes we can make that'll also help assist the dispatchers in recognizing an urgent message. So that would be important for us. It's something we want to do.
Yeah, the short term here, because we still have potential of another storm like this to hit the area. So we're talking about long-term things and after-action reports. What about the short term? We still have the same dispatcher working. I mean, what steps have been taken in the short term here to make sure that doesn't happen again?
So one of the things, right, on a big complex incident like this, Fire and EMS was focused on the people in the water, and while we weren't aware of the other problems, maybe one of the things our team is thinking about for the future is how do we more rapidly on the scene do an assessment and identify the hazards. I don't think anybody thought that wall was going to collapse, but now we know that's a possibility. We'll adjust our SOPs on scene to look for that. I think that's probably one of the most, we're learning lessons from this, and I think that's important.
Looking forward, I appreciate the fact that in any bureaucracy, news or otherwise, people are looking to fix things after they've happened, after action reports, opportunities. There's work to do, all the bureaucratic things you can say. But I haven't heard anyone say, we made a mistake when the dispatcher did not convey the urgency of the first call at 5:06 that walls were coming in at this business district dogs on Rhode Island Avenue. I haven't heard you say you made a mistake. That's why I asked you earlier, you've been advised by legal not to say a mistake was made. You may be fixing the disciplinary or better training, but for the human beings and the families that lost dogs, I think they'd like to hear someone say, we're sorry there was a mistake made and we are working hard to fix it. It won't happen again. I have not heard that today. I've seen a sanitized transcript of the timeline. I haven't seen the radio calls, but it sounds to me like someone, I don't want to identify him or her, someone made a mistake at OUC, you're sorry, and you're trying very hard to fix it so it doesn't happen again. I haven't heard that from the administration.
I am sorry, for what happened. I have over 300 employees.
Excuse me, I understand
Go
your
ahead.
difficulty. I said a mistake was, I don't want you to say mistakes were made because that's a horrible saying, but that in this instance, the information was not properly forwarded to the people who could act on it, the fire department. That was a mistake. Will you agree with that and say the word mistake?
No, because what I'm telling you is the call taker took the information. That got passed to the dispatcher. The dispatcher took what was in that card. A call was dispatched to District Dogs for Tower 3. Tower 3 was then placed in service. All of that information from those cards were then put into the other card, the card that they were already on, and that information was in there.
So
What
it's
I
not a
will,
mistake by an employee, but a process error?
what I will say is that it leaves room for us to strengthen how we communicate with responders on the scene, especially when they're not in front of their computers.
So your
I am
procedures were
dedicated to doing that, and we will be making procedural, policy, and operational changes to reflect that.
Any other reporters have questions besides Mark and Tom? Guys,
Well, would you like an answer to our question
you
about?
guys are only asking the questions.
Yeah, but some of us have been on this story since the first day asking these questions. We're getting a little frustrated.
I know that all their reporters.
Yeah, but they,
I did have one question. In terms of, you were talking about, that OUC doesn't give, I guess, priority to certain calls. In this case, when we're talking about the misspeak that you said, when somebody says there's water coming in, is that something that's going to change? Will there be a priority issued?
So that's something that Chief Donnelly and I will have to discuss and look at operationally as a whole. Right now, when 911 calls come in for service for fire and EMS units, they are dispatched, regardless of what that is for. A stomach ache, a heart attack, anything. Everything is dispatched as soon as it is received by the dispatcher on the Channel 1 channel for FEMS. MPD does have priorities. Those priorities are always predetermined by the responding agencies. They are not determined by OUC.
And on my question, you didn't get the answer.
I'm sorry.
What is the short-term solution in your department? Like, what has been told to them since this happened to make sure we have something today, tomorrow?
Sure. So
React
we,
differently.
yes, no, thank you. So we don't just sit on this until it's convenient. We take action right away. So I was listening to those calls on Monday. I was putting our team together, our investigators. We were fact-finding. Our OPSD team, who's our training division, they were alerted, as well as HR, because they have to be involved if and when discipline is necessary. And so we are having, within the first 12 hours, we are fact-finding, and we're making changes. And so we have roll call every single morning, and we talk about these things, and we listen to these calls, and we, talk with the call takers and dispatchers about, what were they thinking in that moment? How were they thinking? So that we can eliminate any guesswork. Their job shouldn't have to be guesswork. They're answering between 75 and 85 calls a day per person.
Have they been told that there's another flood in a place?
Yes.
And don't say water leak, say.
Yes, that we have made those corrections, and we are working more closely with the fire liaison, especially if incidents are starting at one place and then kind of spreading, right? Because this started, and then it kind of just got built upon throughout the course of the incident. And so, yes, to answer your question.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. You told us in the briefing that there isn't a code for the type of situation that was happening.
Correct.
Which could be part of the reason why it was communicated as a water leak. It seems like we're having more intense rains, more intense floods. Why isn't there a code for a situation where water is coming into a building with people inside of it?
So we use what we call a criteria-based dispatch, and that protocol system just doesn't have that built out. Chief Donnelly and I were just talking, and in the meantime, we're going to use the building collapse card because that seems more appropriate. We just had that conversation between the last time we saw you and now. So we'll be doing that, and then we will also be looking to see if there's like a more poignant question, working with the fire chiefs in operation, because they also, again, they determine the questions that are being asked, so it paints the better picture for them.
Questions that the call taker is asking a member of the
Yes,
public.
that would benefit the firefighters responding.
Following up to that, just a year ago, District Dogs flooded, not to this magnitude, but were there any improvements that were supposed to be made then, or any changes that you think should have happened?
I cannot speak to that. Maybe Chief Donnelly can.
I'm sorry, I don't have any information on that.
Got it. And then just last question from me, just what's your message to the dog owners who did lose their furry friend?
I am so sorry for that loss. Losing a dog is hard, and I am so incredibly sorry. We're also looking at different ways that we can also provide service when animals are involved. It's not something that historically we've looked at, but are committed to in the future as well.
I'd just like to say that I'm so sorry for their loss, and that, I wish the outcome could have been different, and unfortunately it wasn't, but we're very sorry for your loss.
Director, after talking so much about transparency, are you gonna change anything? Is this the way you wanted to roll out the information, in the sense of we had a week, we don't have the radio call as promised, other agencies were involved in this? What's gonna change? Because we can understand the frustrations from people that were living the situation
Sure.
and dealing with. What's gonna change at this point regarding transparency?
So I don't do this in a vacuum, but what I can tell you is that as far as the parts for myself, I had my information, I was making moves with less than 24 hours later. As far as like the collaboration, we're dedicated, I remain dedicated to doing that and working with our partners. I think that is something that makes all of us better, and certainly I know that there are things that we have to change at OUC, and I've been working really hard to make some of those changes. But at the same time, I also know that every single day, regardless of the fact that we're short-staffed, regardless of the fact that we're taking several hundred more calls a day than we were a year ago, that my staff is showing up. They are team players. They never stopped. They never went home during the pandemic. They showed up, and they continue to show up. And I absolutely hate that every single time, that when we have to make those difficult decisions, because I know that they come dedicated to the jobs that they do, and they take those very seriously. What I also will say is I know that they aren't giving up. That tomorrow, today, when you leave this room, if you need 911, they'll be there to answer. Our call performance is increasing, wait times are decreasing. I'm working on getting more staff in there, but I've never met a more tenacious, passionate group of people, and I don't ever want that to be lost in any of
But
this.
specifically releasing the transcripts, would you change anything in this rollout? In the sense we get snippets, a week later we get this, we're not given the radio calls to complement after DC officials spoke out. Again, you're not doing this in a vacuum. You're hearing them also saying we're gonna give everything out, and now we're given 5 pieces of paper, and then we roll out this way. Are you gonna change anything?
I'm responsible for the calls. When these calls don't come from a public location, there's a little bit more around that. I can't just give out every call that every person requests. So working on streamlining that process, I surely can be dedicated to that. But it's not, there's still some barriers or, some guardrails around what we can release and when we can release it.
So Director, 2 questions. One, you knew a week ago, after reviewing all the transcripts and the calls, that there was no code for this kind of an incident, and that may have contributed in whatever way
Sure.
to whatever cause. A week later, you haven't made a change to that until after our questioning downstairs.
I can't make changes to the call types by myself.
You just
That
said-
has to
You
come.
and the chief just decided 5 minutes before walking in this room that you're gonna make that change. Why
That
did
we're
you-
using a pre-existing call type. So
Right,
maybe if
why-
I was,
Why did it take a week to make that decision?
I-
I'm sorry?
I don't have an answer other than we're looking at everything, we're walking through things, we're talking about things. At OUC, I cannot make a change to a call type on my own. Call types are not owned by OUC. They are owned by DC Fire, they are owned by
This
MPD.
protocol of we have a flood again, we're gonna classify it as a class building. You could have done that a week ago. But you don't, you, by your own acknowledgement, you don't know why you didn't do it a week ago. You just did it after we started asking you tough questions. So my next question, you acknowledge that there were multiple errors made by your dispatcher that led to delays in firefighters being told they misspoke, they didn't categorize it right because they didn't read the card right. You're understaffed.
Those were all separate people, Mark. So
The dispatcher, you said there's a dispatcher.
on Channel 1, the person who
Okay.
said water leak is
So-
different than the person that was talking
Okay,
to
so
the
go
Rhode
ahead.
Island
So you have
Command.
multiple people making errors here, but you won't look in the cameras and tell the owners of those dogs that you're sorry mistakes were made? You won't acknowledge, when Tom Sherwood asked you, will you acknowledge mistakes were made? You just told us mistakes were made. But now you're saying this, you won't acknowledge and apologize for mistakes being made?
What I am saying is We could have done things differently. This was an unprecedented event. And so now, as we look at what we could have done differently, we are making changes. There was no policy or protocol at that time for those people to do the things that we're talking about doing now. Because it took all of us sitting down.
Reading the CAD report in its entirety, of course there are policies, no.
Okay, thank you, Director.
Thank you.
If you want to know why people are frustrated with OUC,
Thank you.
this is exactly the reason.
why.
This is exactly why, Director. Walk away and blame people all you want.
That